consequences. And then global forms and meanings of eating. One of my favorite articles about food is Yung Yan's piece on McDonald's in Beijing, which is in the Food and Culture Reader. And he talks about what does McDonald's mean in Beijing. You know, it has meanings to us here in the US. It's fast food, it's cheap, it's quick, it's not considered particularly elegant or wonderful. It's totally different in Beijing. It's expensive, it's slow, people go to McDonald's to hang out, it's prized, they have clean bathrooms, which is not that common in Beijing, and it's also a place that really promotes gender equality, interestingly, because what he talks about in that article is how for women, eating in restaurants, a woman alone eating in a restaurant was suspect. She was thought to be a loose woman. Whereas at a fast food restaurant, a woman could go and eat alone and feel safe and not lose her respect. And she could also order for herself. Whereas at a classic Chinese restaurant, men ordered for women. You know, sort of like that thing, you go to a fancy restaurant and the man's menu has the prices and the woman's doesn't because it is assumed that the man is paying. Well, in Beijing, in McDonald's, the women felt empowered in the fast food restaurants. Wow, all this stuff going on is totally foreign to what's going on in McDonald's here in the US. So any questions about this so far? Yeah. Linguistic anthropologists in food? That is a good question. I haven't seen any linguistic anthropology in a long time. The one article I'm thinking about was kind of an analysis, like a structural analysis of how people talked about food. I mean, I could imagine, for example, getting data on how people name their food and what those names mean. What's a tamale? Yeah.
Someone kind of relates to the question. I just went to a conference in Italy, and we're talking about the issue of translation, translatable foods. Because, I mean, somebody actually was doing a linguistic, now that you mentioned it, analysis of, you know, certain dish in Italian. You know, say something in Italian, I'm usually Italian.
Spaghetti alla carbonara.
And then you have the English translation, that it's a narrative of what it's supposed to have in, but doesn't sound as poetic and wonderful. So the linguistic study was how much can you really translate a food meaning from one language to another. So that's like one recent example of people in Italy who are working for linguists, trying to understand how menus are constructed for different audiences, for instance.
And a lot of it is heavily influenced by the ethnobotanists.
Yeah.
You know, what do people consider in our natural environment edible? What we consider edibles can be very different from someone who lives and works in the Yucatan Peninsula or in the Amazon basin. What they consider to be edible, we might consider to be very disgusting, or, you know, just a lot of greens, not necessarily know which is toxic or what is actually a healing herb or something that's really, really nutritious for our human body. Okay? So local people have different ways of codifying their environment and making sure that they understand what is toxic and what is beneficial to their systems.
Yeah, and I mean, I think it's a really good question that suggests that this is a field ripe for study. Now, one thing that popped into my head related to my research in Italy was interviewing people about their foods and then thinking about how the words in their language reflect deeper meanings. And so there's this word in Italy, gola. Is it the same in Spanish? No. Okay.
Because I've read your books.
Yeah. Okay, so gola means desire for food, or even gluttony, excess desire for food, like, ooh, I'm goloso for chocolate. Ooh, I really crave and love chocolate. But gola is also the word for throat. And so what I said, oh, throat, that's where food comes in, but breath and life also come in. And so maybe with this concept of gola, you sort of spin out the linguistic analysis of it and learn learn a lot more about the meanings of food in a particular culture. So, and I think one of the reasons why linguistic anthropology is not as much in the forefront today as one was in the past is we have many fewer researchers in anthropology who are fluent in more than one language. So any of you who are bilingual are already a way huge jump ahead of many anthropologists who don't have necessarily the same kind of grant opportunities to do long-term foreign field work where they are immersed and really learning a language with fluency.
We'd like to share with you a regional. Red or green? What are we talking about? Red or green? Chile, right? Enchiladas or a stew, that's green or red.
Yeah.
Chile verde, chile colorado. And then you're gonna have to respond. And in New Mexico, if you want both, you say Christmas. Red and green. You know, a little bit of
I didn't know you could have both.
Yes, you can.
Okay, I'll remember that.
They each
So-
have distinct flavors, right? And some people like how many of you like red enchiladas? How many of you prefer green?
And will you fight to the death?
On Christmas.
Very good. Okay. So, I am editor of this scholarly journal called Food and Foodways. Yeah.
I have a question regarding the globalization of food.
Yeah.
What happens when the ingredients change from place to place? For example, to me, Maria Chuchena is based in Juarez, and Maria Chuchena here in El Paso, just crossing the border, the taste in El Paso is, I personally don't like it. And as much as I love Maria Chuchena in Juarez. personally.
Right.
And I've eaten because I was in desperate need of food, McDonald's in Paris, and it was totally different.
Right.
So,
I mean, this is a wonderful question that is ripe for research. And Meredith and I were just talking last night about her work on the tamale, which apparently exists all over, not just the US, but all over the world, but has different wrappings, different ingredients. You know, Veracruz, you said fish in your tamale, someplace else it's pork. It's an interesting way in which people either create foods from the ground up or they take their foods with them and then adapt. And I get a lot of my students, I have a recipe assignment I have them do, and they have to talk about a favorite family recipe and then sort of trace it back up the generations. So maybe it started in Hungary and then sort of came, you know, with some great grandparent to New York, and then it moved from New York to Pennsylvania where my university is. And along the way that food is transformed. So maybe today it now has canned corn, whereas back in Hungary it was cabbage, who knows? So these are really interesting questions. And then what happens to, let's say, an Ethiopian immigrant in Pennsylvania who wants teff, because this is what they use to make their bread, and you can't get teff. So what do? How do you substitute, and what are the consequences of that? And a really interesting question for people who are now saying, local food, you know, this is a mantra. We should all be eating local food to subvert the hugely costly to the environment global food system. But if you're an immigrant, you can't eat local and eat your traditional foods. There's no teff, there's no, who knows what else, amaranth, or, you know, a certain spice. You can't get it locally. Are you supposed to give up your foods and eat local, or are you supposed to sacrifice local for some of those key ingredients?
You have your mother-in-law send you some.
You have, exactly, exactly. And so, you know, and what does this mean about power relations? So really fascinating questions ripe for study by anthropologists.
Dr. Queen, in this class, the next assignment's a life and labor history, and within that assignment, you have food, right? What is a particular dish that's important to your family? And a lot of you will have the opportunity to talk about a dish in your family. So making tamales together with all the women in your family, or making a porridge, or making a stew. And I've had Japanese students, Filipino students, a lot of our Mexican-American students trace a dish to their great-great-grandparents, right? Or great-fathers, great-great-grandfathers with a Japanese Filipino from Hawaii, right? He traced it through the male lineage. So start thinking about what food do I want to inquire on in my own lineage, in my own family. If there's a particular dish that you're particularly proud of, that you see reoccurring at your table. Okay, that's a note to self, please.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And at the same time, when I've had students do this, they come back and say, I learned so much about my grandmother that I never knew. This was a great assignment. It forced me to stop taking my grandmother for granted and really delve into her knowledge, her life, because with food comes so much else. Migration, family relations, work history, everything. Yeah. So this, I'm the editor of this scholarly journal, Food and Foodways, and I was just, looking through at some of the articles we've published by anthropologists in about the past 5 years. And I mean, you can see it goes from everything to freegan. Anybody know what freegans are?
Well,
Freegans. Yeah, what are freegans?
basically, people that basically look for discarded garbage
Yes.
that is still usable in some ways.
Yes. People that dumpster dive or scavenge food in Central Park, New York. What's growing here that's edible? What can I get where I don't have to enter the capitalist food system? How can I survive outside that? And of course you say dumpster diving and everybody goes, ugh. But there's a lot of food that is wasted in this culture that is perfectly edible.
My husband and his friends, they pick olives off Mesa Street. So he showed up really late at night with a bag of olives. And I said, what am I supposed to do with that? He's like, I don't know, Google how to cure them or something. Call my mom. But I'm like, they're picking up olives. You ever see Arabs on Mesa picking up Arabs? Olives from a tree. That's my husband and his friends. That's a freegan. I don't have a name for him.
Yep. So, and again, there are people like your husband who's maybe doing it like, oh wow, olives. Other people who are doing it to make a political statement. We refuse the capitalist food system. We're gonna skirt around the edges of it. Dangerous repasts, food and supernatural in Quechua oral tradition. So collecting folklore from Quechua Indians in, was that in Peru? Yeah. And looking at the images of food in those stories. Farmers markets in low-income communities. There's a big movement in the U.S. among progressive people to bring back farmers markets. How are they doing in low-income communities? Are they improving food security? What are the barriers to successful farmers markets in low-income communities? They're doing fine in well-off communities where people are not so concerned about every penny spent on food. But if you're on a marginal income, is a farmer's market a successful alternative? This article on Globesity looked at fast food in the Philippines and how Filipinos think about fast food, who uses fast food, and how the actual food in fast food may be contributing to the export of the obesity problem that we are dealing with here in the United States. Food maps, this is a very interesting article by Lidia Marte, who studied Dominican immigrants in New York City. And what she did as one of the methods, besides the more traditional participant observation and interviewing that we cultural anthropologists rely on, she also had people draw maps. Like, how do you get your food from the mother-in-law or the mother back home, back in the DR? So they would have all these maps, I go to the Dominican bodega in the Bronx. I go to my cousin's house in, Manhattan, and I get food from home. very interesting methodologically, and also to trace what the meanings of food are and the access to food in the diaspora.